Her car sank into the river. The Mafia boss surfaced, holding her. "You're safe now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain poured relentlessly that night, a constant beat against the pavement as Emily drove down the winding road. Her car's headlights barely pierced through the dark, foggy night. The weather was unforgiving, a perfect storm that had appeared out of nowhere. As she navigated the narrow road, a sudden gust of wind pushed the car, sending it veering off course. Panic surged through her chest as she tried to regain control. The tires screeched in protest as the vehicle spun, hitting the guardrail before plunging into the water below. The cold rush of the river engulfed her as her car sank rapidly, the weight of the water pulling her deeper. Emily gasped for air, fighting against the panic that gripped her. She struggled with the seatbelt, her hands slick with fear and water, but the clasp wouldn't budge. The water kept rising, the car creaking under the pressure, and she realized she was running out of time. Every second felt like an eternity as her breath grew shallow and desperate. She screamed for help, but the only sound was the deafening roar of the water. Her heart pounded, and in that moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. Then, as if by some miracle, the car shifted. It was as though fate had decided that Emily wasn't going to be swallowed by the cold, dark river just yet. A shadow appeared in the murky water. Before she could even process what was happening, a powerful hand grabbed hers, pulling her from the sinking vehicle. She was dragged to the surface, gasping for air. Her vision blurred, but she saw him, the man who had saved her. A stranger, with dark eyes and a presence that commanded authority. He pulled her onto the bank, the rain still coming down in sheets. She coughed and sputtered, trying to catch her breath, but the man's grip never loosened. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm, though there was an undeniable edge to it. Emily looked up at him, still dazed from the crash, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would be on a rainy road in the middle of nowhere, saving someone like her. But there he was, holding her like she was the most important thing in the world. She opened her mouth to thank him, but the words got caught in her throat. He was no ordinary man. His tailored suit clung to his broad frame despite the rain, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes full of intensity. And then, as if sensing her confusion, he spoke again. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Not now." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't from the cold. She didn't know who he was, but one thing was clear. Her life had just taken a turn she never saw coming. The man who saved Emily from the river was nothing like anyone she had ever met. His presence alone was enough to command attention, even in the middle of a storm. As she sat on the damp ground, struggling to steady her breathing, she looked up at him, her mind racing. Who was he? Why had he helped her? He was dressed in a dark suit, his hair slicked back, and his eyes, those intense, almost black eyes, seemed to pierce right through her. He stood there, his posture unwavering, as if the rain and the chaos of the moment didn't faze him at all. "Are you okay?" His voice was low and smooth, with an accent she couldn't quite place, but it carried a weight that made her feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. Emily nodded, still trying to wrap her mind around everything that had happened. She had been seconds away from drowning, and now, here she was, sitting on the side of the river, safe but confused. "What's your name?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse from the cold water. The man looked down at her, his gaze unreadable. "You can call me Dante," he said simply, his tone giving nothing away. "And you're lucky I was here. It's not often that I'm on this road." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, not from the rain, but from the way he said it. It was almost as if he was suggesting he had been watching her, or that he had known something would happen tonight. But she didn't press him. Instead, she pulled her soaked jacket tighter around her body, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in. "Thank you," she said quietly, grateful but still in shock. Dante didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek phone. He dialed something with swift movements and then held it to his ear. "Make sure the car's ready," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily's eyes narrowed in confusion. A car? She had been certain that she would end up walking back to civilization, wet and cold, or maybe calling a tow truck. But this man, he seemed to have everything planned out. "You're coming with me," Dante said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "There's a place nearby where you can dry off and rest. It's not safe for you to be alone right now." "I don't understand," Emily replied, shaking her head slightly. "I'm fine. I just need to get home." She tried to stand, but the cold had already drained most of her energy. Her legs felt like lead, and she stumbled slightly. Dante stepped forward in an instant, his hand steadying her. "You're not fine," he said. His words weren't harsh, but there was no room for argument in his tone. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but something about his unwavering confidence made her pause. He wasn't asking. It was clear he wasn't giving her a choice. "Please," he continued, his eyes softening just a fraction. "I'm not letting you leave here like this. You need help, and I can offer it." Something in his words made her stop, made her reconsider. She had no idea who this man was, or why he seemed to have so much control over the situation. But somehow, despite the chaos in her mind, she felt an odd sense of safety when he was around. Maybe it was the way he had pulled her from the water, or the calmness in his eyes that made her believe he could handle anything. She didn't want to go with him, but her body was exhausted, and the idea of being alone didn't seem like a good one right now. She nodded slowly, deciding to trust him, at least for now. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet. "I'll go with you." Dante's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to soften just a little, as if he was relieved by her agreement. "Good choice," he said simply, before turning and motioning for her to follow. They walked in silence toward the edge of the riverbank, where a black car with tinted windows was waiting, as if it had been sent just for them. The driver, a man dressed in a sharp suit, opened the door for Emily, and Dante gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Emily slid into the back seat, her body still trembling from the cold, and Dante followed her in. The car's interior was warm, the leather seats soft, a stark contrast to the harsh night outside. Dante didn't speak for a moment as the car began to drive away from the river. Emily sat in silence, staring out of the window at the dark streets as they passed by. She didn't know where they were going, but for the first time since the accident, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The rain had stopped, and although the night was far from over, she felt, for some reason, like it might be okay. Dante finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "You're safe now," he said, his tone firm, as if making a promise. Emily turned to look at him, her eyes still full of questions. She wanted to ask him who he really was, why he had been there at that exact moment, but the words caught in her throat. For now, she would hold on to the one thing she knew. She was alive. And that was enough for now. The car smoothly glided through the quiet streets, the rhythmic hum of the engine, the only sound filling the silence. Emily sat in the back, staring out of the window, the cool night air now mingling with the warmth of the car. Her mind raced, but no thoughts seemed to stick. Dante, the man who had saved her life, sat across from her, his posture poised, his expression unreadable. She had agreed to go with him, but now that they were driving through the deserted streets, she felt more uncertain than ever. Who was he? And why had he helped her? They had barely exchanged words since they left the riverbank, and though Emily was grateful to be alive, she couldn't help but feel like she was caught in something much bigger than herself. Dante's presence was powerful, unshakable, and yet he remained calm and distant, as if nothing could rattle him. She shifted in her seat, trying to shake off the lingering unease. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice sounded small, as though the words were too heavy for her to say. Dante didn't immediately answer. He leaned back slightly, his gaze still focused on the road ahead, as if contemplating whether to share anything with her. Then, in a low voice, he spoke. "You'll be safe," he said, his words calm but firm. "That's all you need to know for now." Emily frowned, her brow furrowing as she processed his words. Safe? But from what? And why was he so sure? His confidence was both reassuring and unnerving. She had no idea who he was, or what kind of life he led, but she could tell that he wasn't just any ordinary man. The car continued down the road, taking turns into neighborhoods she didn't recognize. They passed through quiet streets lined with expensive homes, each one grander than the last. Eventually, they stopped in front of a large gate that seemed to rise out of the shadows. Dante spoke again. "We're here," he said simply, his voice steady as he opened the door and stepped out. Emily hesitated, looking around at the estate. It was massive, the kind of place she had only ever seen in movies. She could see the outline of the mansion through the gates, the lights from inside casting a soft glow against the night sky. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe, but also a sharp pang of discomfort. Dante was already standing by the gate, waiting for her. She stepped out of the car slowly, her legs still shaky from the adrenaline of the crash. She had no idea what to expect, but as she walked toward the gates, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world she wasn't meant to be a part of. The gates opened silently, as if they had been expecting her. Dante led her inside, the security guards standing at attention, their eyes watching her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. The mansion before her was even more impressive up close. Tall, stone walls, a sprawling garden, and windows that gleamed like dark eyes in the night. As they walked up the long driveway, Emily couldn't help but feel like a pawn in some strange game. But there was no going back now. "Come on," Dante said, his voice soft but commanding. "You'll be taken care of." Emily nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. She followed him inside, the door closing behind her with a soft thud. The interior was just as grand as the exterior, with high ceilings, marble floors, and chandeliers that glittered in the dim light. Dante led her through the massive hallway to a sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth, the warmth of it contrasting with the chill in her bones. He motioned for her to sit on one of the plush chairs. As she sank into it, feeling the warmth seep into her limbs, Dante sat across from her, his eyes watching her with an intensity that made her feel like she was under a microscope. "You're safe here," he said again, his tone softer now, though still with an air of finality. "But I need to know what happened." Emily hesitated, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice still shaky. "The river, the accident. It wasn't random. Someone wanted you gone," Dante said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "And I'm not letting that happen." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Someone wanted her dead? She opened her mouth to speak, but Dante held up a hand, silencing her. "I know you don't understand, but you will." He stood and walked toward the window, his back to her. "I've been watching you, Emily. You're in more danger than you realize." She stared at him, stunned. Watching her? How did he know her name? She had no idea who this man was, but something about his words made her believe him. And suddenly, the sense of safety she had felt earlier slipped away, replaced by a gnawing sense of fear. Who was she really dealing with? Dante's words hung in the air, thick with meaning, as Emily sat frozen in the chair. He had been watching her? He knew her name? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. She had been pulled from the river by a stranger who claimed to be protecting her, but now, he was speaking as though he knew exactly who she was and what had happened. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words were lost. Dante turned from the window, his gaze focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being dissected. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "But I need you to trust me. Whoever is after you won't stop." Emily blinked, trying to absorb what he was saying. "I don't even know who's after me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dante's jaw tightened as he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "That's because you don't know the whole story. But you will." He paused, studying her as though weighing his next words carefully. "There's something I need you to understand, Emily. You're involved in something much bigger than you realize. This isn't just about you. It's about something I've been working to stop for a long time." Emily's heart raced, her pulse quickening with a mixture of confusion and fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dante's eyes softened just slightly, as if trying to calm her. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his tone almost gentle. "But there are people out there who would hurt you to get to someone else. And I won't let that happen." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing through her. "Do you trust me?" Emily hesitated. She had no reason to trust this man. This Mafia boss, who appeared out of nowhere, saved her from the river, and was now claiming to know everything about her. But despite the doubt, despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides, she found herself nodding. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante studied her for a moment before nodding in approval. "Good," he said, stepping back. "That's the first step." The room felt heavier now, as if the weight of his words had shifted the very air around them. Emily's head was spinning. The Mafia? The danger? She felt like she had been dropped into a story she didn't understand, with no way out. She didn't know who Dante was or why he was so determined to protect her, but for some reason, she felt like there was no other option. She was in too deep now. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice shaky. Dante's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Now you stay here," he said. "For your own safety." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off. "It's not safe for you out there. You don't know who you can trust, and right now, the only place I can guarantee your safety is here." Emily's chest tightened as she looked around the opulent room. The mansion felt foreign to her, and the more she thought about it, the more it felt like a gilded cage. She had no idea what she had walked into, but she knew one thing for sure: she didn't have a choice. Dante turned, his movements smooth and deliberate as he walked towards the door. "I'll have someone bring you some clothes," he said over his shoulder. "You need to rest." Emily watched him leave, the door clicking softly behind him. She was left alone in the quiet room, the crackling fire in the hearth the only sound in the stillness. She leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to collect her thoughts. The world outside felt so far away, like it belonged to someone else. As she sat there, her mind kept returning to one question. Why was she so important? Why had Dante gone to such lengths to protect her? And who were these people that wanted her gone? The questions swirled in her mind, but the answers felt as distant as the stars. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just out of reach, waiting for her to figure them out. The fire flickered in the corner, casting shadows across the room. For the first time in hours, Emily allowed herself to relax. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long she would stay in this strange, dangerous world Dante had introduced her to. But for now, she was alive, and that was all she had to hold on to. The morning came too soon. The light spilling through the heavy curtains of the room Dante had led her to the night before. Emily stirred, groggy from the lack of sleep and the events of the previous night still fresh in her mind. The soft sound of footsteps outside the door made her sit up straight. She hadn't expected to feel at home here, but the quiet luxury of the room, its rich fabrics, polished wood, and glowing fire, was like nothing she had ever known. She had been running on adrenaline since the accident, and now that the rush had faded, the uncertainty crept in. What was this place? And more importantly, what was Dante's role in her life? She had no answers. She barely even understood the questions. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and the door creaked open. A woman in her mid-30s entered, holding a tray of food. She was dressed in a simple, yet elegant outfit, her demeanor calm and collected. "Good morning, Miss Emily," she said with a warm smile. "I brought you breakfast. Mr. Dante asked that you be made comfortable." Emily blinked, still unsure of what to make of everything. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from the night's ordeal. The woman set the tray down on the small table next to the chair where Emily had been sitting and turned to leave. But before she could exit, Emily spoke up. "Wait, who are you? And where exactly am I?" The woman paused, her hand still on the door handle. She turned back, her smile faltering just slightly. "I'm Sophia," she said. "I manage the household. As for where you are, you're in the Romano estate. It's a place where you will be safe." Emily frowned, her confusion only growing. "Romano? Is that Dante's last name?" "Yes," Sophia answered, her voice steady. "Dante Romano. And he's the one who made sure you're safe now." The name hit Emily like a weight she couldn't quite bear to lift. Dante Romano. The name sounded both familiar and foreign, as if she had heard it somewhere, but couldn't quite place it. It was clear, however, that he was more than just someone who had rescued her from a dangerous situation. The fact that she was now in his estate, the grand mansion that looked more like a fortress, spoke volumes about his power. Emily swallowed hard, trying to shake off the unease settling in her chest. "But why me? Why am I here?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia's smile faded completely, her eyes darkening just slightly. "Mr. Romano believes in protection," she said carefully. "There are people who would harm you. And Mr. Romano won't let that happen. You're under his care now. Emily wasn't sure if she should feel comforted or frightened. It was like she was being pulled deeper into a world that didn't make sense. She thought about what Dante had said the night before, that she was in danger, that there were people after her, but none of it felt real. How could she be in danger? She was just an ordinary woman. There was nothing remarkable about her life. I don't understand, Emily whispered. I was just driving home. Then I crashed. What does this have to do with anyone wanting to hurt me? Sophia took a deep breath, her expression softening. I know this is all very overwhelming, Miss Emily. But please trust me when I say that Mr. Romano has reasons for everything. You're safe here, and that's all you need to focus on right now. Emily wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the exhaustion from the night before was catching up with her. Her body ached from the cold, and her mind couldn't keep up with the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I don't know how I got here, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But thank you. Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. You're welcome. I'll leave you to rest. If you need anything, I'm just outside. Emily sat in the room alone, her thoughts swirling. There was so much she didn't know, so much she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Dante Romano was someone powerful, someone dangerous, and now, her life was connected to his. The reality of it all began to settle in like a heavy fog. What had she gotten herself into? The door closed behind Sophia with a soft click, leaving Emily alone with her questions. She glanced at the tray of food on the table, but didn't feel hungry. Instead, she moved toward the window, her gaze falling on the sprawling grounds outside. Everything was so quiet, so still. But beneath that calm surface, something dangerous lurked, and Emily had a feeling it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. She pulled the curtains back, her eyes scanning the property, as if searching for answers in the shadows. There was so much she didn't know, and so much she still had to learn. Dante had promised her safety, but at what cost? She wasn't sure if she wanted to know the answer, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. Emily sat in the room for what felt like hours, the silence almost suffocating. The luxury of the estate felt foreign to her, as if she didn't belong in this opulent world. She hadn't signed up for any of this. Her life had been so ordinary, so simple. But now, here she was, trapped in a mansion she didn't understand, under the watchful eye of a man she knew nothing about. Dante Romano. She had tried to push the questions from her mind, to let her exhaustion take over, but the weight of the unknown was too heavy. She stood up, pacing around the room, her eyes searching for something, anything that could help her make sense of the situation. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was a pawn in someone's game. But whose game was it? Dante had made it clear that she was here for protection, but protection from what? Or more importantly, who? She walked toward the door and paused, her hand resting on the handle. There was no way to know what was happening outside this room, but she couldn't stay cooped up forever. She had to figure out what was going on. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The estate seemed even more intimidating in the daylight. Long, grand corridors lined with expensive art and thick carpets led in every direction. There was no sign of Sophia, the woman who had greeted her earlier, but Emily felt eyes on her, as if she were being watched. She turned down a hallway, walking with purpose even though she wasn't sure where she was going. She wanted answers, but she wasn't sure if Dante would give them to her. She couldn't just wait around for him to decide when it was time to explain everything. She needed to know why she was here. As she walked, she noticed a large wooden door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. She hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The room beyond was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the sunlight, but it was the figures inside that caught her attention. Dante was standing by a large desk, his back to her. But it wasn't just him. There were two other men in the room, both dressed in dark suits. One was older, his gray hair slicked back, his face hard and lined with experience. The other was younger, his expression cold and calculating. As soon as Emily stepped into the room, Dante turned, his gaze locking with hers. There was no surprise in his eyes, just a steady calm that unsettled her even more. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and firm. Emily stood in the doorway, her heart racing. "I need to know what's going on," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" Dante's gaze softened just a fraction, but the man beside him spoke before he could. She's not ready for this, the older man said, his voice gruff and authoritative. We need to keep her in the dark until we know more. Dante's jaw tightened, and he glanced at the younger man, who gave a slight nod. She's ready, Dante said, his voice firm. She just doesn't know it yet. Emily's confusion deepened. What do you mean? What's going on? What's this about? Dante stepped forward, his presence filling the room. There are things happening, Emily, he said quietly. Things you don't understand. And there are people who are willing to do anything to keep those things from coming to light. That's why you're here. To stay safe. To stay out of their way. Emily's mind was racing, but she couldn't make sense of anything he was saying. Who are these people? What do they want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The younger man spoke this time. It's not just about you, he said, his tone almost dismissive. You're involved because of your father. Emily froze, her heart pounding. My father, she repeated, her voice catching in her throat. What do you mean? Dante's eyes darkened, his expression hardening. Your father was involved in something that you don't know about. Something that's much bigger than you ever imagined. And now you're in the middle of it. Emily felt like the ground was slipping out from under her. Her father had been dead for years. He couldn't have been involved in anything now. That's not possible, she said, her voice shaking. He's dead. He can't be involved in anything. Dante's gaze never left her, his expression unwavering. He's not here anymore, but his actions have consequences. And those consequences are still very much alive. And now they've come for you. Emily felt the blood drain from her face as the weight of his words sank in. Her father. She had known he wasn't perfect, that he had his demons. But she never imagined they would come back to haunt her like this. You're saying my father left me in the middle of something dangerous? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dante nodded. Yes, he said, his voice steady. But I'm here to make sure you don't have to pay the price for his mistakes. The room felt colder now, the silence heavy between them. Emily didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to think. All she knew was that she was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. And there was no way out. Dante was right about one thing. She wasn't ready for this. But she had no choice now. She was already in too deep. Emily stood still, her mind reeling as Dante's words echoed in her head. Her father had left her tangled in something dark, something dangerous, and she had no idea what to do with that information. Her father was long gone, yet his past was now haunting her, pulling her into a web she had no idea how to navigate. Dante's gaze never wavered as he observed her, waiting for her reaction. Emily tried to steady herself, but the weight of the situation was too much. She wanted to scream, to run away from it all, but she knew that wasn't an option. There was no escaping it now. What am I supposed to do with this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence commanding her attention. You don't have to do anything yet, he said, his voice calm and steady. You're not alone in this. I'm here. I'm making sure you're safe, and I'll protect you from whatever comes next. His words were reassuring, but they didn't ease the knot in her stomach. She still had so many questions, so many uncertainties. How do you protect me from something I don't even understand? She asked, shaking her head. I don't even know what this is all about, Dante. How am I supposed to trust you when you won't tell me the full story? Dante's eyes softened just a fraction, but there was still an edge to his gaze. I'm telling you what you need to know for now, he said quietly. You'll understand more when the time is right. But trust me, Emily, this is bigger than you think. The people who want you gone are powerful, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Emily's pulse quickened, her heart racing in her chest. She had known something wasn't right from the moment Dante had saved her from the river, but now she felt like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And what do they want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed lost in thought. I don't know yet, he admitted, his voice low. But I do know that your father's actions have set things in motion that are beyond our control now. You're involved because of things you don't even realize. But don't worry, Emily. I'll make sure nothing happens to you. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he would keep her safe, but there was too much she didn't know. Too many unanswered questions. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? She asked, her voice shaky. Just sit here and wait while you protect me from. I don't even know who. Dante stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. No, Emily. You won't just sit here and wait. I'm going to teach you how to protect yourself, how to fight back when the time comes. You'll be ready when we face them, I promise you that. She looked at him, still uncertain. He was offering her safety, but at what cost? And why was he doing this for her? I don't understand why you're helping me, she said, her voice soft. I'm just a random person to you. Why risk everything for me? Dante's eyes darkened slightly, but there was something in his gaze that softened. You're not just anyone, Emily, he said quietly. Your father may have made mistakes, but you don't deserve to pay for them. And I don't do this for just anyone. You're important to me. Now, his words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't know what he meant by important, but she felt a strange pull towards him, a connection she couldn't quite explain. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Dante's expression remained unreadable. You don't have to say anything, he said. Just know that you're safe. And I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. His words should have reassured her, but the lingering questions still gnawed at her. Who were these people after her? What did they want? And why did Dante care so much? There were so many unknowns, and Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of something far bigger than herself. Dante turned toward the door, motioning for her to follow. Let's go, he said. There's still much to be done. I'm not leaving until I know you're safe. Emily stood up slowly, her mind still racing. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that Dante was her only hope. She didn't have a choice but to trust him. She didn't have a choice but to follow him into the unknown. Emily followed Dante through the grand hallways of the Romano estate, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The mansion felt like a labyrinth of cold marble floors and dark corners, each room more luxurious than the last. She felt like a visitor in someone else's life, unsure of her place in this world of wealth and power. Dante walked ahead of her, his pace measured, as though he belonged here, as though this mansion were a part of him. Emily couldn't help but wonder how someone like him had become so entrenched in this world, and why he was so intent on protecting her. The questions had piled up since the moment he'd pulled her from the river, but now that they were inside the estate, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had no answers, only more confusion and uncertainty. As they passed through yet another corridor, Dante finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. You're going to stay here for now, he said, his tone businesslike. We're going to get you ready. You need to be prepared. Emily looked up at him, her brow furrowing. Prepared for what? She asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Dante didn't answer immediately. He stopped in front of a large wooden door and opened it, gesturing for her to step inside. The room was bright, with sunlight streaming in through the windows. It was warm and inviting, in stark contrast to the rest of the mansion, which felt cold and unwelcoming. There was a large desk in the center, papers and books scattered across it. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with an assortment of items that made the room feel lived in, like someone had actually spent time there. What is this? Emily asked, looking around. Dante smiled, though there was something calculating in his eyes. This is where we'll start, he said, his voice calm. You're not just going to hide here and wait. I'm going to teach you how to protect yourself. Emily felt a shiver of unease. Protect myself? She repeated, the words almost foreign to her. Dante's expression became serious, the air between them shifting. You don't understand yet, Emily. The people after you are not ordinary people. They don't care about laws or rules. They will stop at nothing to get what they want. And I'm not going to let that happen. He stepped toward her, his gaze unwavering. You're more than just a target. You're a symbol of something much larger. Something your father was involved in, and something I've been working to stop for a long time. The danger isn't just about you. It's about what you represent. Emily swallowed hard, trying to wrap her mind around what Dante was saying. She was just a regular woman, caught up in a world she didn't understand, dragged into something that felt like a nightmare. I still don't understand, she said softly. Why me? What am I supposed to do? Dante's eyes softened just a bit, though there was still a hardness to his expression. You're not alone in this, he said, his voice steady. You're going to learn how to protect yourself, how to fight back when the time comes. And you will fight. There's no running from this. The people after you will find you no matter where you go. But if you're prepared, if you know how to defend yourself, you'll have a chance. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never imagined that her life would come to this. She wasn't strong, she wasn't trained, and she wasn't prepared for any of this. But Dante's words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. He wasn't offering her a way out. He was offering her a way to fight. She nodded slowly, unsure of what she was agreeing to, but knowing she had no choice. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Dante nodded approvingly. "Good," he said. "We start tomorrow. You're going to train, learn how to defend yourself, how to move in this world. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." He stepped back, gesturing to the chair at the desk. "Sit down. We have work to do." Emily took a deep breath and walked over to the desk, sitting down slowly. Dante pulled out a chair opposite her and sat down as well. "The first thing you need to know is how to stay out of their way," he began, his tone shifting into a more instructional one. "You can't hide in the shadows forever, but you can learn how to protect yourself, how to get out of dangerous situations, how to spot threats before they even know you're there." Emily listened intently, trying to focus on his words despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. She had no idea how to fight, how to defend herself, but she knew she couldn't rely on Dante forever. She needed to learn how to stand on her own. "This isn't just about self-defense," Dante continued. "It's about strategy. You have to learn how to read people, how to understand their intentions before they even speak. And you need to know how to stay calm in the worst situations. Because if you panic, you're as good as dead." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing his words, but the weight of the situation pressed on her chest. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of it. But she didn't have a choice. Dante was right. She had to learn how to survive. The world she had known was gone, and now, the only way out was through the darkness. The next few days passed in a blur of intense training. Emily was pushed harder than she had ever been before, both physically and mentally. Dante had set a strict schedule for her, and each day, without fail, he was there, watching her, guiding her, pushing her to the edge of what she thought she could handle. She woke up early before the sun even had a chance to rise, and worked through a grueling series of exercises. Cardio, strength training, hand-to-hand combat drills, everything. The hours blurred together as she trained relentlessly, her muscles aching and her body begging for rest. But Dante's eyes never softened. He had a purpose, and so did she. She had to be ready. Dante's methods were tough, but they were effective. The first few days, she struggled to keep up. Her legs wobbled from exhaustion after every workout, and she found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she could actually keep going. But something inside her pushed her forward. There was no other option. Her life, her very survival, depended on it. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not in this world Dante had dragged her into. Dante was always there, watching her every move. He'd push her to her limits, then pull back when she needed to catch her breath. He never gave her a moment to feel sorry for herself. Every time she faltered, he was right there, offering a word of encouragement, but always with a steely resolve in his eyes. She wasn't allowed to fail. It was the first time in her life that she truly understood what it meant to have someone who expected nothing less than perfection from her. The first time someone saw potential in her she hadn't even known existed. As the days passed, Emily began to feel stronger. She could run longer distances, lift heavier weights, and execute the self-defense techniques Dante had taught her with more precision. She no longer stumbled when she sparred with him. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was learning, adapting, and becoming someone she didn't recognize. Someone capable of defending herself. She had learned how to spot danger from a mile away, how to read people's intentions, how to move with the stealth of a shadow. Dante had taught her more than just physical strength. He had taught her to trust her instincts, to always be aware of her surroundings, and to never, ever let her guard down. But despite all the progress she was making, there was still a part of her that felt out of place. She had become a weapon in Dante's world, but she wasn't sure if she could ever fully belong there. She was still just Emily, the woman who had been dragged into this mess because of her father's mistakes. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger. The person who had been pulled from the river no longer seemed like her. She was someone different now. Dante noticed the shift in her. One evening, after another brutal round of training, he called her into his office. It was the first time he had asked to speak with her outside of their regular sessions. Emily walked into the room, her muscles sore, but she had gotten used to the feeling of being pushed to the edge. She stood in front of his desk, waiting for him to speak. Dante didn't say anything for a moment. He was sitting in his chair, looking at her, as if weighing something in his mind. "You've come a long way," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. But you're still holding something back. Emily frowned, confused. What do you mean? Dante leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You've learned the techniques, the strategies, but you're still holding back when it matters most. You're afraid of something. She looked away, the words hitting her harder than she had expected. I'm not afraid, she said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. Dante didn't respond immediately, just watched her with that intense gaze. You are, he said softly. And that's okay. But you need to face that fear if you want to survive. You need to stop holding back, Emily. You need to trust yourself. His words hung in the air between them, settling in her chest. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. She had been holding back, not just in her training, but in her own life. She had been afraid of everything that had happened to her, afraid of the person she was becoming, afraid of the world Dante was drawing her into. But she couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. Not if she wanted to survive. I'll get there, she said quietly, finally meeting his gaze. Dante nodded, a small but approving smile crossing his face. You will, he said, his voice firm. But you need to trust yourself first. Emily stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't just training her body. She was training her mind, her heart. She had to let go of the fear that held her back. She had to trust that she could handle whatever was coming, because she didn't have a choice. The next day, as they resumed training, Emily felt something shift inside her. She pushed harder than ever before, trusting herself in ways she never had. The fear was still there, lurking in the background, but she didn't let it control her. She had a purpose now, and nothing would stop her from seeing it through. Emily had never imagined she would find herself in the position she was now in. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury and comfort, had turned into a place of intense focus and survival. Dante had pushed her beyond limits she hadn't known existed, both physically and mentally. But today felt different. It was as if the storm within her was finally beginning to calm. The training had become second nature to her, every movement, every technique, every strategy. She was no longer the woman who had been pulled from the river. She was stronger, more aware, and, most importantly, more capable of defending herself. But even with all the progress she had made, something inside her still felt unsettled. She had learned how to fight, how to think strategically, how to stay calm under pressure, but the fear, though quieter, still lingered. The fear of the unknown, the fear of what was coming, and the fear of the life Dante had brought her into. Emily sat in the corner of the training room, wiping the sweat from her brow as she tried to catch her breath. Dante was observing her from across the room, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze intense. He had been pushing her hard the last few days, but today, something felt off. He had been quieter than usual, more distant, and it unsettled her. She knew Dante was always in control, but today, he seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. You've come a long way, Emily, he said, his tone unusually soft. She looked up at him, surprised by the lack of the usual authority in his voice. Thank you, she replied, still panting slightly. But you're still holding something back, he added, his eyes never leaving hers. You've learned everything I've taught you, but you're not fully embracing it. You're still afraid to fully trust yourself. Emily's chest tightened. At his words, it was true. Despite everything she had learned, she had not fully embraced who she was becoming. She was still unsure, still holding back. I'm not afraid, she said, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Dante stepped forward, his presence commanding. You're lying to yourself, he said quietly. You're afraid of what you'll become if you let go. You're afraid of the power you've gained, of the things you're capable of. Emily stared at him, her heart racing. She didn't know how to respond. He was right, in a way. She was afraid, not of the danger she might face, but of the person she was becoming. She had started this journey as a woman with no real purpose, but now, with Dante's guidance, she was becoming something else, someone capable of fighting, of taking control, of surviving. But what would that mean for her? What kind of person would she be when all of this was over? I don't want to become something I don't recognize, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Dante's gaze softened, but his expression remained serious. You're not becoming someone else, Emily. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. He stepped closer, kneeling in front of her, his eyes searching hers. You're strong. and you have the power to shape your own destiny. But you need to stop fighting it. You need to trust yourself. Emily felt a surge of emotion rise within her. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long hiding from who she was meant to be. But Dante's words pierced through her defenses, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had learned. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone who could fight back, who could make a difference. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. Dante nodded, a proud smile crossing his face. "I know you are," he said. "Now it's time to show them what you're capable of." The words hung in the air between them, and Emily felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had been afraid, but now she understood. It wasn't about running from the fear, it was about facing it head-on. The people who wanted to hurt her, the life she had been forced into, it was all a test, a challenge. But it was also an opportunity to take control, to fight for her life, and to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. Dante stood, extending a hand to her. Emily took it, her grip firm. As she stood up, she felt a rush of determination flood her veins. She wasn't just a woman being dragged into a dangerous world. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she wasn't going to back down. The days blurred together as Emily continued her training under Dante's watchful eye. She felt stronger, faster, more capable than she had ever been. But even as she honed her physical abilities, a deeper tension grew within her. She was learning to fight, to protect herself, but the weight of her father's past, and the dangerous world Dante had drawn her into, was never far from her mind. She had been training for what seemed like an eternity, yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming on the horizon. There was no way to avoid it. She had to face what was coming. She had to face the people who wanted her dead. Dante had told her that it was all connected, that her father's actions had brought this danger into her life. She couldn't understand it, couldn't grasp how a life she had lived so quietly for so long could suddenly be so filled with violence and uncertainty. One afternoon, Dante called her into his office. His expression was serious, more so than usual, and for the first time, she felt the familiar chill of unease settle in her stomach. As she stepped inside, he didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, his arms crossed, watching her closely. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Dante cut her off. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "About what?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Dante didn't immediately answer. He walked over to the desk and pulled out a folder, placing it in front of her. "This is the information we've gathered about the people after you," he said, his tone grim. Emily swallowed hard as she glanced down at the folder. It was thick, filled with papers, photographs, and notes. She hesitated for a moment before slowly reaching out and opening it. The first page was a photograph of a man she didn't recognize. The image was grainy, but the cold, calculating look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. She turned the page, her hands trembling. More photos followed, each one showing different people, some familiar, some not, but all with the same intensity, the same coldness. She flipped through the pages, her stomach churning with each new revelation. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice tight. Dante leaned against the desk, his expression dark. "They're part of a network. A powerful group of individuals who control more than you can imagine. Your father's debts were tied to them." Emily's mind raced. Her father had been a gambler, a man who'd made reckless decisions that had ultimately led to his downfall. But she couldn't understand how that had led to this, how it had connected her to these dangerous people. "But he's dead," Emily said, shaking her head. "How does this affect me now? Why are they coming after me?" Dante's eyes softened for a moment, but his voice remained firm. "Your father made deals with them, Emily. Deals that put you in danger, and they've been waiting for the right moment to collect. You're not just a victim of his past mistakes. You're part of something much bigger." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had thought she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now, she realized, this was never about an accident. This was about her being tied to her father's legacy and the people he had crossed. Dante took a step closer to her, his expression softening. "We've been trying to keep them away from you, but they're getting closer. It's only a matter of time before they make their move." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she absorbed his words. She had been training to fight, to survive, but the reality of the situation hit her all at once. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her life, for the life her father had left behind, and for a future she wasn't sure she wanted. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaky. Dante's gaze never wavered. "We get ready," he said simply. "We prepare for whatever comes next. And you're going to be ready." Emily nodded, though the fear in her chest grew. She had never asked for this. She had never wanted to be caught in the middle of this dangerous world. But now, there was no turning back. She was in too deep. She had to face whatever came next, whether she was ready or not. "You won't be alone in this," Dante said, his voice steady, reassuring. "I'll make sure of that." But Emily wasn't sure if his words were enough to calm the storm inside her. She had come a long way in her training, but the real test was about to begin. She wasn't just training to defend herself anymore. She was training for a battle she had no control over, and for a life she had never imagined. The day of reckoning had come, and Emily could feel it in her bones. She had trained for weeks, pushing herself harder than ever, but now she faced the true test of her abilities. Dante had kept his promise. He had taught her how to fight, how to read people, how to survive. But the question remained, would it be enough? Emily had no idea what to expect, but the weight of everything she had learned pressed heavily on her shoulders. She stood in the training room, fully dressed in the gear Dante had provided her, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It had been a few days since they had gone over the files, since Dante had told her about the people after her. People her father had made deals with. People whose names she still couldn't fully comprehend. But what she did understand was the danger that surrounded her, and the fact that she could no longer hide from it. Dante was beside her, his eyes steady as he watched her, reading her like an open book. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a tinge of something more serious in it. Emily met his gaze, the familiar nerves gnawing at her. But she had trained for this. She had prepared for this moment, and now there was no turning back. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Dante nodded, the faintest trace of a smile crossing his face. "Good. You'll be tested today. You need to know what you're capable of when it matters." He motioned to the door. "Let's go." As they made their way out of the room and down the long corridors of the Romano estate, Emily's heart raced. The estate was quiet, the usual silence hanging heavy in the air. But she could feel the tension in the air, an unspoken understanding between her and Dante that something was about to change. They reached a secure part of the estate, an area that was more fortified than anything Emily had seen before. Guards were posted at various checkpoints, and there was a heightened sense of security that made her stomach twist with unease. Dante didn't say anything as they approached a small, unassuming door at the end of the hall. He glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Inside," he said simply. Emily stepped through the door and into a dimly lit room. It was smaller than she expected, a stark contrast to the grand spaces she had grown accustomed to in the estate. In the center of the room was a table, surrounded by men in dark suits. They turned as she entered, their expressions cold and calculating. Dante stood beside her, his posture rigid. "These are the men who want you dead," he said, his voice low. "They've been after you since your father's deal with them went south. Today, they want to test your skills, see if you're really ready." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The faces before her were unfamiliar, but the aura of power they exuded made her skin crawl. "You're not here to fight them," Dante added, his eyes meeting hers. "You're here to prove to them that you're not a liability. You're here to show them that you can hold your own." She nodded, though her mind was spinning. This was real. There was no training left to do. There was only survival. One of the men at the table stood up, his movements smooth and calculated. He looked her over, his gaze sharp, appraising. "She's the one, then?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Dante's gaze flicked to Emily before answering. "She's the one," he said firmly. Emily's heart pounded as she stood there, facing the group of men who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. She could feel their eyes on her, studying her every movement. But she couldn't let the fear take over. She had come too far. "What do you want from me?" Emily asked, her voice more confident than she felt. The man who had spoken before smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "We want to see if you can handle yourself," he said. "We want to know if you're worth keeping alive." Emily's eyes narrowed. She had been pushed to her limits, trained for this moment. but she wasn't going to back down. This was her moment to prove herself. Dante stepped back, his face unreadable as he watched her. Emily knew this was the moment he had prepared her for, the moment when she would either sink or swim. The man stepped closer, his posture relaxed, as if toying with her. "Show us what you've got, then," he said, his tone mocking. Without thinking, Emily moved. She didn't need to wait for his instructions. Her body reacted instinctively, every lesson Dante had taught her coming to the forefront. She struck fast, a series of quick, precise movements that caught the man off guard. He stumbled back, surprised by her speed and accuracy. For a split second, she saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. That was all the time she needed. She moved again, blocking his next move and twisting his arm behind his back, pinning him to the ground. The room fell silent. Dante's gaze never wavered, but the men around the table looked stunned. The man on the floor cursed under his breath as he tried to wriggle free, but Emily held him firm, her strength undeniable. She had done it. She had proven she could hold her own. Dante stepped forward, his voice low. "That's what you need to know," he said to the men at the table. "She's ready." Emily released the man, stepping back and wiping the sweat from her brow. Her heart was racing, but she didn't feel the same fear she had before. She was done running from this. She was ready. The final test had arrived, and Emily stood at the edge of the courtyard, feeling the weight of everything she had worked for. The training was over, the lessons learned, and now it was time to face the truth of the world Dante had pulled her into. She could feel the cold air brush against her skin, a reminder of everything that was about to change. Dante stood beside her, his presence unwavering, but she could sense the tension in his posture. This wasn't just another lesson. This wasn't about her learning to defend herself. This was about proving that she was ready for what was coming next. The enemies were closing in, and the stakes were higher than ever. Emily had trained to survive, to fight back, and now she was about to face the men who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had come a long way since that night by the river, but the question remained, was she truly ready? The distant sound of engines broke the silence, pulling Emily out of her thoughts. She turned to Dante, her heart pounding. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "They're here," he said quietly. "It's time." Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was finally here, the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for control of her own destiny. Dante led her toward the entrance of the mansion, his footsteps steady and purposeful. The heavy doors swung open, revealing a group of men gathered in the courtyard. They were a formidable sight, men dressed in dark suits, their faces cold and calculating. Among them, Emily recognized the man from the photographs she had seen days before, the one who had seemed so dangerous, so untouchable. The man who had made it clear that she was nothing more than a pawn in their game. He was standing at the front, his eyes locking with hers as if he could already see the fear in her gaze. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She had come too far to turn back now. Dante stopped beside her, his presence a wall of calm in the midst of the tension. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of finality. "You know what to do." Emily took a deep breath, her mind clearing for the first time in what felt like forever. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for herself, for the life she deserved, the life she had been denied. She stepped forward, her feet moving without hesitation, her heart steady with purpose. The men in the courtyard watched her, their gazes narrowing as she approached. But she didn't look away. She had learned to read their eyes, to understand their movements, to anticipate their next move. She had learned to become the predator, not the prey. As she came closer, the leader of the group spoke, his voice cold. "You think you're ready?" he asked, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you can stop us?" Emily didn't flinch. "I'm not here to stop you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to take control of my own fate." The man laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You think you have control?" he sneered. "You're nothing but a piece in a game much bigger than you." Emily stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "You don't get to decide my future anymore," she said, her voice hard with resolve. The man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing with fury. "You don't know what you're up against," he spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Dante stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She knows exactly what she's dealing with, he said, his gaze never leaving the man. And you've underestimated her from the start. Emily felt the shift in the air. She could sense it, the power that Dante wielded in this moment. The weight of the situation, the danger that surrounded them, seemed to fade away as she realized one thing. This was her fight. And she was ready. The man stepped forward, his hand reaching for something at his side. But Emily was faster. She had trained for this, and in that moment, everything clicked into place. She moved swiftly, taking him by surprise, knocking the weapon from his hand before he had a chance to react. The men behind him drew their own weapons, but Dante was already one step ahead. He moved with the precision of a predator, neutralizing their threats with ease. But Emily didn't wait for him to finish. She was already on the move, taking control of the situation, disarming the man she had first encountered. She had done it. She had faced them, and she had won. The courtyard was silent, the tension finally broken. Dante stood beside her, his expression one of approval. You did it, he said, his voice low. Emily's heart was racing, her body buzzing with adrenaline, but she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had faced her fears, she had fought back, and she had taken control of her own fate. The man she had fought was on the ground, subdued, and his allies were either incapacitated or retreating. The battle was over. For now. Dante turned to her, his eyes softening just slightly. You're ready, he said, his voice filled with pride. Emily nodded, her breath still coming in short bursts, but a sense of peace settling within her. She had done it. She had proven herself. The world she had been dragged into was no longer something she feared. It was something she controlled. And no one, not even Dante, despite his power, could take that away from her. In this thrilling dark romance, Emily finds herself drawn into a dangerous world where power, control, and survival are at stake. Her life is turned upside down when a mysterious man named Dante saves her from a deadly situation, only to pull her deeper into a life she never asked for. As Emily trains under Dante's watchful eye, she learns the harsh realities of her new existence, where trust is a luxury and survival is the only goal. The dark romance between Emily and Dante grows as they face powerful enemies who are determined to destroy her. But as she confronts her own fears and pushes through the pain, Emily discovers that she is more capable than she ever imagined. This dark romance is filled with suspense, danger, and intense emotions as Emily and Dante navigate the treacherous world they inhabit. As the stakes get higher, the line between love and power becomes blurred, and Emily is forced to confront her own desires and the darkness that surrounds her. With each new challenge, the dark romance between them deepens, and Emily realizes that in this world, survival and love may not be so easily separated. If you love dark romance, power dynamics, and intense character development, this story will captivate you until the very end.